Okay, so welcome to this session about Python developer experience with Polylith. And my name is David. I'm a developer. I live and work here in Stockholm. And I've been in like the Python community for a while, but also a lot in the Clojure community, writing functional programming. Node.js, and I was a bunch of years in the .NET community too, like writing C# and ASP.NET and stuff like that. But since a couple of years, all in Python. So this talk, I'm thinking about having it in like three parts. So starting off just terminology, because I think it's a little confusion between what's a microservice and what's a monolith and stuff like that. So just going through quickly, at least my definitions of these terms. And then I'm quickly going into a thing called Polylith. So basically what it is, and also the developer experience that comes with Polylith. So basically what is Polylith, and then why should we even care and use it? So, okay. So some terminology, and again, this is how I have interpreted these things. So monolith, to me, that sounds like a thing or like an app or something that you deploy all at once, or at least in one piece. And that thing, so it could be like maybe Shopify or even Stack Overflow, something like that, has definitely many different parts. But when you deploy it, it's like one unit that you do. Then you can have different ways of deploying it, but it's still like one thing that you work with. So on kind of the opposite side is microservices. So having a microservice setup is basically having these different parts in as separate and fairly isolated running apps or services. So you deploy them separately, and they can like communicate with each other through like REST or maybe events or something like that. Yes, and monorepo, even though it's like sounds like monolith. Before I kind of dug into this Polylith thing and all of these, I had like almost like an equal sign between monolith and monorepo. But the monorepo is basically, that's the Git repository. That's the place where you have your code, basically, and maybe configuration and like infrastructure things. So a monorepo, that's a repo, but a monorepo would probably mean more like having more than one thing that you deploy somewhere in the same repo. So if you would have a set of microservices, you could have, if you have them in the same repository, then you would probably have a monorepo. So that's kind of at least my view on these three different things. And I really like microservices. We use it in, oh, what happened? We use like microservices in where the place I'm in right now. So, but what I think, at least from my own experience, from what from the places I've been, is that a common setup with microservices is that you usually have your services, each service in each repo. I think it's a quite common thing. So you have your Git repo for, let's say that you have a Shopify or maybe an e-commerce platform. You have probably a pricing service living in this repo, and maybe you have like a product service living in that repo. And then there's like a different teams responsible for these kinds of services. And a trade-off with that, a couple of things that I have identified as being like part of many of those teams is that I've been in one team that I was. We were like had the kind of owning or responsible for like 5 or 6 services, and that meant keeping track on 5 or 6 repositories. So it can grow quite fast, and the kind of setups, even though if they start up maybe from some template or something similar, they kind of diverge over time. So that's at least one trade-off or the concern that I have identified. And the thing that I think is one of the most important is like duplications of code, duplications of like configuration and infrastructure and things like that. You might have like Kubernetes configuration. It's almost identical in this service, but it's the name that differs. So it's often quite at least from the places I've joined, quite common to have these kind of code snippets that are almost the same. Maybe you use like Sentry, maybe you have like a code, something starting that up, or Datadog, or something like that. And it's fairly similar in most of these services. And what we have done in the teams that I have joined, and I think it's a common thing, when like the duplications are big enough, we can like extract that code and create a library from it. And maybe we have like a private PyPI repository where all the services can download or install that shared library. But who's going to own that? And that's going to be at least another repository. So these things I think are issues in a common microservice setup, at least issues that I have identified. So my question is it maintainable, or oh no, that's certainly a lot to maintain. Oh, please don't give up on me, screen. Yes, I'm back. Okay, so and this is where Polylith comes in. So what is that? So Polylith is basically an architecture or like a way of organizing code or something like that. But it also comes with the tooling support. So I better do this from time to time, not to make my computer go to sleep mode. You might, if I forget, please remind me to just do something. So Polylith, like the basic parts of this kind of architecture is that we have like something called libraries, which is like things that you find on PyPI, maybe like Fast API or Pydantic or things like that, third-party software that you use in your applications. And another important part in Polylith is bricks. And bricks are the actual code that we write, the Python code that we write and use in our different projects. And thirdly, we have something called projects, project or projects, depending on how many services you want to have. And a project is the thing that you actually deploy somewhere. So it's like that microservice, like that pricing microservice or that ordering microservice or whatever it is. So that's one project in the Polylith-like world. So going back to bricks, which is kind of the center, to me at least, it's like the most important thing, and that's the code that we write. And Polylith has borrowed the words or the terms from Lego, because I think if you read an article about Polylith, you certainly will see the word Lego a bunch of times, because how Polylith views on code is that if you have built Lego, you know that there's small parts that you can combine to something useful or something nice to look at. So the code we write is sort of like Lego bricks. And if you see that, there are two different colors of these kinds of bricks. And that means that in Polylith we have two types of bricks. So the blue ones are called the bases, and that's also borrowed from Lego. You know, if you have built Lego, you might have started out or had like a base plate, this thin thin starting point where you put your Lego pieces on. So that's kind of the metaphor for a base in Polylith. And in Python code, that would be like maybe like an entry point, a route in Fast API. That could be like the base plate. And then the green ones are called components. And components are the actual implementation, the things behind an endpoint or the main function if you do a terminal app or something. So that's where the actual code that does something lives. So bases and components. So and I know this is very like high level and abstract, but I will show you my editor and some code shortly. Yeah. So the Polylith architecture. Who made that? Well, it's these three. It's Joachim, Furkan, and James. And they kind of operate in the Clojure community, in Clojure language. So Polylith started out in Clojure, but has been kind of spread in at least in Python, and I think also Kotlin maybe. So they kind of came up with this architecture and also tooling support, because you probably want some tooling to make your development experience really nice. And I actually was fortunate enough to work in the same team as Joachim Tengstrander. So I learned everything from the father of Polylith. So we were writing Clojure software there, and when it was time for me to do something new, I went back to the Python community, and I wanted to like bring in the good stuff that I have learned from Clojure into Python, like tools and how you develop software and like some little bit of functional programming and stuff like that. So I developed the Python tools for the Polylith architecture. So if I'm switching to my code editor, I'm going to increase the size a bit. Now nothing works for me like this, okay. What am I doing wrong? Okay, let's skip that. So what I have now is an editor, dark themed editor, and behind it I have just like Mac OS terminal, C shell. So what I've done here, I have created an example repository, example Polylith mono repo with like an example setup. So what we have here is what is, I don't think I mentioned it, but the main idea is that all the code is like on the top level. So you have one developer environment, so you have access to all the code. And that means that all the code is, you are able to share it across all your services. So that's like kind of the main thing. So when I develop things, I have all the code for all the services. And if you remember the two types of bricks, they are stored in a basis and a components folder. So this is like the two types of bricks. So basis contains the entry points. Maybe I can open this one up. So this is a fast API thing. And just using other code. So this is like a thin layer, the base plate, using components, which are the Lego bricks. So you kind of build things on it, on top of it. So the components is actually the list of everything you can do in this repository. So all the kind of smaller parts that become something useful, a feature. And you know, this is just an example repository, and those ones are often too simplistic. This one is also a lot simplistic, but in a real world scenario, you probably would have a lot more components, maybe like 20, 30, even more, depending on how big your software stuff is. So all the code lives in bases and components, and you have the project stored in a projects folder. So here I have 5 projects, but I don't have any code stored here because the code when we develop is what we do when developing, and the project is something that happens when we do deploy things. So I basically have a PyProject TOML file and maybe some additional infrastructure if I wanted. Maybe I want to run it in a Docker file, and then it's a good place to store it. So the project specific, I opened one fast API project, a super simplistic one. The thing that it contains, it's actually only the bricks that this is relevant to this project. And again, this is like an oversimplified fast API app. So this one needs 3 bricks, 2 components and 1 base. So it's 1 entry point and 2 things like printing out hello world or something. So we are not really working during development down here. We are up here in the top root folder. So you see, I don't know if you see it, but I have one single virtual environment, and I have a development specific project file. So this one contains all the code. So I have all the bricks, I have all the bases, all the components, and also all the dependencies and all the dev dependencies, because up here it makes sense to have like Black, iSort, MyPy, and Flake8 and all that stuff. But when I'm going to deploy something, maybe I don't need the dev dependencies along there. So, and that means also that all the code has the same kind of coding standards. So I use the same Flake8 and MyPy setups for the entire repository. So from a developer perspective, I can start on like an IPython shell. And since I have access to all the code, imagine that I have like a huge monorepo with like 20 microservices. So I can start importing. I can, you see, I have like prepared. So you have this IPython being smart enough to help me here. But I can start experiment and try out code that is like in the entire monorepo without messing around with different virtual environments and different versions of everything. See, my editor fails me today, but maybe I can still give it a try. I have another folder called development, and this is a place where for like experimentation and exploration. Let's say that I'm in a team and we're about to like build something new, but don't really know what to do, just experimenting. So this is a good place to create your, like, see, I have my david.py here. It could be named anything, but it's like a space where you can like try out things. If you're like a PyCharm user, maybe you know about Scratch files. So that's kind of the same thing, but we have it like in the project and things that you can like go back to and redevelop and even try out having things that isn't really ready but almost ready, so you can start working on it like this. Good. So what I do, I usually don't go to my shell like this and write code. I rather use a technique called REPL-driven development. And I use my editor, I write code, and I kind of evaluate the code along the way in an in-editor REPL. So I can like select this one and check what's in the data. Okay, it's a string that contains hello world now. And I can execute code, see just if things work out. So this is like a thing that this architecture like has really good support for, because you have your entire like ecosystem available for you. So that's like a little bit of REPL-driven development. It works well if you are like a Jupyter Notebooks. If you like that, it should also be possible to have notebooks using all the code. Okay, so I'll go back to this. So so this is kind of the way when you write code and try out things, and like, but maybe it's you want to know who is using what and which services are in this repository, and that's where the tooling support comes in. So this is where the Python tools for the Polylith architecture comes in. Currently, it's a poetry plugin. So it's a command called poly, and what you want to do comes after. So this polyinfo thing will actually list what's in my repository. So it turns out that I have a bunch of components, a bunch of bases, use the green ones and blue ones, and I have 5 projects plus the development project. So it's a list of what I have in this repo, but also I think what's more interesting is that you see that Kafka thing over there. I can see where that particular brick is used. So it's used in the consumer project and the message fast API project, I think it's called, but not the other ones. So if I would change the code in this component, then I probably would want to redeploy these ones, but not this one. So that's kind of what the tooling support gives you. Just an overview like this, or in automation when you have like your continuous integration stuff like Circle CI or GitHub Actions. So what is also, there's a bunch of commands. I'm just going to show a couple of them. There's a polydiff command too. So currently I haven't changed anything. It compares to the latest stable tag in my repository. But if I go into that Kafka thing and maybe go into the producer and do some sort of change and run this again, you see that, this tooling has noticed that I have been changing something in the Kafka component, a file living in that namespace package. And it also suggests that, okay, it probably makes sense to redeploy the consumer project and the message faster by API project. So this is information that your CI can pick up, and if you want to automate these things. And I'm running out of time, but I'm going to show you one last command. And it's polylibs, and it's going to list, you can list it per project or the entire monorepo, but it's going to show you what kind of third-party packages you have, like if you use it in, and which brick is using what, so you can like get an overview of what you actually use in this thing. So going back to the slides, yes, I forgot about this slide. So a lot of teams have already started to use this. It's been around for not even a year. The first version was like beginning of this year. And I got the teams that I've been in contact with has shared a really good feedback. I really like the last part. I was able to delete a whole bunch of hacky code. That's like my favorite thing of software development, deleting code. Just remove it. So less code is a lot better. So I was really, really happy to hear about that. But to be fair, I also got not that positive feedback. And that's mostly when introducing things like this, it's online. So, I think it's mostly when introducing a new way or different way of using like phrases like architecture and structure and what even more, like hot topics that kind of engages people, and maybe some engages in a negative way. But I kind of use this feedback to try to understand what's going on in different teams and what makes sense for some people, obviously, and what makes no sense for others. That's my favorite. It's better to read a book from Eric Evans instead of using this Polylith crap. So yeah. And yeah, that was basically it. I have talked about some terminology, trying to clear that out, an intro to what the Polylith architecture is, and like a glimpse at least of the developer experience and the tooling and how we can use it, while coding and while deploying things. And, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. So as I understand, so we are approaching like monorepo, and okay, maybe we can connect somehow some repositories, but okay, it's not about Polylith. But and so forgot the question. Nice. So as I understood, so we are keeping versions as it is in the code. So there is like no version A of our A component and no version B of B component. And as you showed, so when we have div, we can understand what components change and deploy in pipelines like what really changed.
Yes.
And yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
So I think it was clarification question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Was there another?
Thank you for a great presentation. I have a project where there is a lot of libs and in other repositories just because they are needed at multiple places. So this is very interesting. But I have a bit of an edge case. Some of my code can only run on a Raspberry Pi when it has some special cards installed, and that is the only time where you can run the libs. And then the other part of the application can only run on Windows. Can you handle that you have different hardware requirements and still bring them in the same repo like this?
Good question. I don't think I ever run into that. Is it like third-party dependency that are like different? Yeah. So I guess if you would be working on a Mac and have like Windows only, then you probably couldn't have all the things in that top developer, if you remember that top Pi project. So I guess a way, if you want to have it all in this kind of monorepo, then I guess either you can kind of exclude things, but maybe that's kind of working around the problem. So maybe that's a case where Polylith, maybe it's not the best fit, because if you wanted each developer to be able to run the code all the time, then you need to support like different, like Mac, Linux, and Windows. So unless your entire team is on the same platform, then it's not like, maybe not an issue. But so that's probably a use case for having a separate repository with that code then. Yeah.
I had a question about this development folder that you showed.
Yeah.
You had a development folder, and I didn't really understand like why it's there, because when you started doing that, I started thinking of like, why wouldn't I use a debugger? But is the development folder meant to be some type of like staging area, and then you like it and then you move it into the other folder, or is it for debugging? Because I don't see why I wouldn't just use a debugger for, but you should.
Yeah, yeah. I was also it took a while before I kind of understood what I should do with that development thing. But it's actually that if you are in a lack of exploration mode and want to figure how to do, it's a good place to start. But it's definitely not like a requirement or something. And what we also used the development folder at one place was that we hadn't really fully automated all the things in the cloud. So once a month we need to like run some sort of script. So we put these one-off scripts in that development folder because they didn't really belong to any specific project. It was like environment stuff. So and I had like
sandbox, so you could use it like maybe like as a sandbox /
Yes, definitely. And I put something called Kafka, and I think it's like a Docker file to be able to run Kafka on your local machine. So maybe like development stuff and stuff, things like that.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
wish I had it about a year ago. We're running a production SaaS project that was very complicated, but it also had not only the SaaS deployments, but also customer managed deployments. So we had lots and lots of repos, and it was running on Kubernetes, and just by being able to better manage the different, there definitely was, as you start dealing with a whole bunch of different Helm charts and everything else, the likelihood of something getting messed up was higher than if you had had some way of kind of, I guess I would call it templating, like what should be in every service versus what's custom to a particular customer. So are there tips for that like scenario that I'm kind of giving you that I should think about, look at?
Good question. I think what this kind of architecture comes from, at least from a coding perspective, is like from Clojure is very minimalistic and functional, and you do these small functions in isolation. So if you have that kind of mindset and think about the components and bases as small parts, then you can easily combine them into something bigger. So from coding's perspective, I think it plays very well with functional program. It's definitely not a requirement. But then on the assignment that today, I'm trying to make us use Polylith there, but we're doing this multi microservice thing. We have this like huge configurations file that are almost identical in each repo. So I haven't really dug into that part, but I would be surprised if it couldn't do anything like very like having something shared. We use customize, it's called, where you can like template Kubernetes config, and that can have a generic and then a very specific config. So you could like throw away a bunch of duplications by doing that. So.